Hello hobbyists, and welcome back to yet another Getting on the Tabletop, where today we are painting up a Churchill Mk III from Bolt Action. So before you I have a Churchill tank, the Mark III version to be more specific, though the Churchill kit can be made with through majority of the marks of the Churchill tank from World War II. I've sub-assembled into three parts: the chassis, the turret, and then the tank commander. This will actually be the first time I'll actually be painting up a tank commander for a bolt action tank. My King Tiger and my M4 Sherman do not have their tank commander, so I wanted to try something new and paint up a tank commander, so we're going to try that out. For the turret and the chassis, I primed them in Angel Green from Army Painter, and then for the tank commander, I did him in Matte Black from Army Painter Primer. So first up, we're going to work on the tank itself, and then we will move into the tank commander. So for the tank itself, we're going to start with a dry brush of Army Green over both the chassis and the turret. I'm probably going to use a larger dry brush for the chassis because it's a large space, and maybe move down to a medium dry brush when it comes to the turret. Once again, that is Army Green from Army Painter. So the dry brush has been completed on our tank. It just picked out all those nice raised areas across the tank here as we look at the chassis. And then here is the turret head, completely dry brushed. Now I did forget to mention with the turret head, I do have it super glued down to this wooden block. I'm just going to remove it from the wooden block and attach it to the tank. Once we've completed all the painting, it's just much easier to do the turret chassis separate from the tank chassis itself. Now we're going to do an overall shade across the entirety of the tank and the turret using green tone mixed 1:1 with quick shade wash mixing medium, both from Army Painter. So the green tone has darkened down our tank, but also blended in the dry brush that we did into the tank itself. Very nice look overall. Here it is on the turret. So now we're going to move into all of the metal, and we're going to use Necromancer Cloak to paint all of that down. That will include the tracks, these cables that are across the two sides of the Churchill, the little toe, the shovels, the machine gun, and on the turret it will simply just be the machine gun right there. And once more, we're going to use Necromancer Cloak from Army Painter to paint all of that up.
So there is the completion of the Necromancer cloak over the entirety of the tank chassis. And here it is completed on the one area that only needed, being the machine gun inside the turret. So the last base color we need to complete is using dirt spatter for the handles of the shovel. So there is the dirt spatter done for the handles of the shovel. Now it is time to wash the base coats we just completed. We're going to use dark tone mix 1:1 with quick shade wash mixing medium for all the Necromancer cloak, and then we're going to use mid brown mix 1:1 with quick shade wash mixing medium for the dirt spatter. So the dark tone has darkened down all the Necromancer cloak across the entirety of our Churchill chassis, and the mid brown giving some nice darkening color to the dirt spatter on our shovels. Here's the look of our machine gun on our turret, darkened down with dark tone ink. Now it is time to begin the highlighting process. And we'll begin the highlighting process by using fur brown to highlight up the handles of the shovels. Then we're going to use a mix of edge highlighting and dry brushing of gunmetal across all of the Necromancer cloak. So there is the fur brown highlighting up our handles for our shovel, and then the gunmetal highlighting up all of the Necromancer cloak here. Now for these cables, I only decided to do the 2 loops and decided to keep the Necromancer cloak gray. I think that's a really nice look all together for them. And then of course I dry brushed the bottom of the tracks. Again, all you have to do is dry brush the tracks that are visible on the tabletop. You don't have to go the full way under, but you can do that like I did, and then I picked out the tips right here with gunmetal, just defining it all just to look very nice and very defined. Here it is on our turret. Again, the only part gunmetal is the machine gun inside of the tank turret here. So now it is nearly time to begin weathering up our tank. Now first we're going to put some decals down on. Now I'm going to complete all the decals off camera and then come back to you, show all the decals and all of that. Now when doing decals, I'm going to use technical art coat from the Citadel to pick out the areas I want to put a decal. I'm going to
paint that art coat down. It's going to allow a place for the decal to stick, and then after I remove the decal from its sheet, stick it there, I'm going to put another art coat over it to keep it in place. Now, art coat is has a shine to it, so it's a gloss varnish. So I'm going to use some anti-shine matte varnish when we varnish over the entirety of the model to remove the shine of the art coat. So I return to you all once I have decaled up my Churchill. So I decaled up our Churchill. I decided to use both of the flags, the two objects down here on the back of the chassis, and I also put a 40 in the front of this. This was actually a bridge marker to tell if the tank could actually go over Pacific bridges, because again, this is a pretty hefty piece of engineering here. So that is of course the chassis. For the turret head, I decided just to throw this 41 on the side, nothing else really. So for you at home, this is the finishing point right here of the tank. All you need to do would pull this away from the block, scrape away that glue, and then just stick it into your tank, varnish it all together, and then you are good to move on to the driver. But for me personally, I've been really enjoying weathering up my tanks. I didn't weather up my first tank being my Sherman, but after that I've weathered up every vehicle I've painted so far. My half-track, my King Tiger, and then for Conflict 47, my Zeus X. So we're gonna move into some weathering for this tank. Now, weathering is completely whatever you want to do. So, if you want to do as much weathering, as little weathering, follow all this weathering, go right ahead. Weather as little or as much as you want. But I got a couple of weathering techniques we're going to use here. So first, we're going to use Strong Tone from Army Painter to give some dried mud effects across the entire model. So we're going to only do this on the chassis. And we're gonna really pick out like the wheel, like the front part of the tracks here. We're gonna pick out like some of the parts around here, just giving some grime. Maybe we might pick a couple areas up here, the front up here, here. So we're just gonna use straight strong tone. We're not gonna mix it with any quick shade wash mixing medium. We wanna use just straight strong tone. And we're going to basically give a selective wash to everything to show dry mud effect across the tank. So the strong tone has given us some nice darkening throughout the model here. It took about a couple coats of strong tone ink, pure strong tone ink to get this coloration. If you wanted lighter, I just go like one. I wanted to give some unique, really good darkness throughout each part of the model to kind of show it. I'm not sure if my camera picks it up great, but there is definitely some darkening throughout it. This looks like some nice dried up mud that's been pulled up as the tracks tear through, you know, the countrysides of Germany and France. Of course, if you're building a Churchill as well, they did serve in the Africa-Cold Wars as well, so you can paint one up there. If you're doing it there, there's not really mud out in really Africa, so I would do like a dusty, sandy color, but again, ours is going to be on the European front, so that's the color scheme we're doing. All right, so now we've had that done, we're gonna use some Monster Brown dry brushed across parts of the model, like the flaps up here, just to show more fresher mud that hasn't really dried yet on the Churchill tank. That Monster Brown is from Army Painter.
So the Monster Brown dry brush has been completed across our entire model here, mixing nicely with the strong tone dried mud to give a very, very nice weather look to our tank. Now we're going to move in doing some chipping where the paint would have chipped away from the chassis and the turret, and we're going to use black gray from Vallejo to do that. And we're going to sponge that on to give a more unique look to the chipping effect. And there is our chipped up Churchill tank. I basically went down the edges here, chipped up this, chipped up the front little mud flaps, chipped up the front part up here, chipped a little bit of the back, and then like I said, I chipped up across the edges. This is where you would typically see the most like damage or scratching or anything on the tank itself. For the turret, I did, of course, like I said, the edging here. I did the front of the area where, of course, the cannon is sitting, and then I chipped up a little bit of that 41 shells, like scratching off the paint there from that 41, so scratching it up. I also scratched up the top of this here where the commander sits. Basically, maybe he's ducking down as shells ricochet off of it. And I dusted up the parts right here where, like, the telescopes that the crew would see from. So scratch those up as well. So we have one more thing we're gonna do for this tank, taking it a little further in to that weathering effect and making it look more like this tank has seen active duty. It just hasn't been able to be fully clean. It's been in the battlefield, just moving from place to place, supporting the infantry in their assault on the German home front. I'm gonna use some Diorama FX from Vallejo, more specifically earth texture, even more specific brown earth, and paint that across the wheels, the tracks and the wheels, just adding more mud to make it look even more like this tank has been grinding through the mud, slowly pushing across the German front with British soldiers behind it. So our brown earth has gone over the entirety of the model here. Now it's going to take a little while to dry, but still very nice effect overall, getting inside the wheels, the track, showing just the mass amount of buildup of dirt that this tank hasn't had. And it binds well with the Monster Brown, with everything we've done, giving some nice effects overall, just covering up those mud flats, looking like this thing has gone through the ringer of dirt. So that is pretty much the tank. Now I didn't put it over all the wheels or anything like that. I was kind of selective on where the mud would kind of fling up, collect. Maybe it went through something and all the mud got scraped away or something like that, or maybe not all the wheels have been covered up with mud. But nonetheless, it's really, really cool. Again, feel free to weather as much or as little as you want to do for your own tanks, your own Churchill you're creating or anything like that. You do not have to do any weathering at all. You can make this tank look like it's coming right off the factory floor, ready to go right into combat. And then, of course, maybe you'll get weathered and scratched up, and then maybe you, like I said, like my Sherman I first did, I did it like it came right off the factory floor, ready to hit the battlefields. Here, I've decided this Churchill has seen combat, is dug into the mud, it has dug itself out of the mud, it's got mud everywhere, it's seen quite a lot of battle. So do as little or as much weathering as you want to do for your models. So with that, the turret and the chassis of the tank are completed. Now let's move on to our tank commander that will sit in our turret. So here is our tank commander that will sit in the open area of our Churchill tank. Again, I primed them with matte black from Army Painter. So first up, we're going to do his entire uniform and his hat, and we're going to do all of that in Monster Brown. So the Monster Brown has been completed over our tank commander. It took about 2 to 3 thin coats to cover over the black primer. Now we're going to move on to his little belt that's like in the middle of his area. And we're going to use dirt spatter to paint that up, alongside using cobalt skin to paint up his flesh, and then using Necromancer cloak to paint up his comms equipment. Those are all from Army Painter. So every base color has been applied to our British tank commander, bringing him out nicely and dividing him from that primer into a nice looking model. So now we're going to wash him. We're going to use 2 washes here. We're going to do a dark tone wash, mix 1:1 with quick shade wash mixing medium for the entire model, besides the flesh, which we'll use flesh wash, mix 1:1 with quick shade wash mixing medium, all 3 from Army Painter. So once I've darkened down everything, the flesh tone gave some nice color to the flesh, and then the dark tone darkened down his uniform, the comms equipment, and his belt. So now it is time to highlight him, and we're going to start with his uniform using khaki from Vallejo to do so. So the khaki has brought out all the folds, raised areas on our British tank commander's uniform. So now we're going to deal with his belt, and we're going to use Fur Brown from Army Painter to do so. So the Fur Brown has highlighted up his belt. So now it is time to move on to the flesh. And we are going to use Corpse Pale from Army Painter. And there are 2 really definable eyes on this face. Now, you know how I am with eyeballs on faces. I don't really like to do them. A lot of times you really can't see them on a tabletop from a 30-degree angle unless you're gonna face down and stare at it. Even then, it's a little hard to pick out. But these do have some pickable out eyeball areas. So I will be picking that out with matte white. Now, of course, I'll be doing that off camera because I'll need to get real close to see it, but I'll at least do some highlighting for Corpse Pale on camera for you all. So there is our commander fully highlighted up for the flesh areas. There are a couple of white dots in his eyes where his eyes are. That's about as far as I'm gonna go for that. And we only have 1 more color to highlight, and that is the Necromancer cloak, which we'll be doing in gun metal. So once I have completed the gun metal, I'm going to remove him from the painting holder,
paste them into the turret of the Churchill tank and varnish the Churchill tank. And with that, the Churchill Mk III tank for bolt action is ready for the tabletop. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this getting on the tabletop. I'd like to shout out Pete the Wargamer for the inspiration for the paint scheme that we painted up our Churchill Mk III in. I'll leave a link down in the description below to his original video. I recommend checking out all his videos. He has a lot of videos on how to paint up a wide variety of schemes for World War II tanks from bolt action. I personally was motivated to paint up this Churchill Mk III because I had pre-ordered a while back Achtung Panzer, which will be coming out in April from Warlord Games, which is World War II tank-on-tank combat. And plus, I just love painting up bolt action tanks overall. Thanks, you're welcome. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you can notify when my videos go live for you. And with that, on to the glamour shots.